So let me read out the sukta here. Well, there are 16 verses, and of course I don't know this Sanskrit, but luckily we have a translation here. 1,000 heads has the cosmic person, 1,000 eyes and 1,000 feet, encompassing the entire earth all around. He exceeds it by a considerable span. The Supreme Person is indeed this all, what was and what shall be. He is the Lord of immortal worlds and of the mortal world that grows by food. Such is the extent of His greatness, and greater still is the Supreme Person. All the beings are only a fourth of Him. His 3/4, that is immortal, is in heaven. With 3/4 of Him, the perfect being rose high, the other 1/4 was again down here. From this He spread out in all directions as that which eats and that which eats not. From Him was born the Shining One, Hiranyagarbha, and from that took birth again the Cosmic Person. As soon as born, He stretched out all over the earth and beyond it, and both behind and before. With the Cosmic Person as their oblation, the gods performed the primal sacrifice. Spring served them as clarified butter, summer as the fuel, and autumn as offering. They besprinkled the fire-born being on the sacred grass as to be sacrificed. Thereupon they performed the unique sacrifice, the gods, the sadhyas, and the seers. From this Sarvahut sacrifice, when fully performed, was gathered up curd mixed with butter. Thereafter came the creatures of the air, animals of the forest, and those of the village. From this supreme sacrifice, when fully performed, were born the riks and the summons. From this were born the various meters, and were born the many ritualistic formulas. From this were born horses and all those creatures having teeth in both of their jaws. From this were born different breeds of cattle, and were born sheep and goats. When they divided up the perfect being into how many parts did they make him? What became of his mouth? What his arms? What of his 2 legs? What his 2 feet? His face became the priest. His arms became the warrior king. His legs the tradesman, and from his feet were born the lowly serf. The moon was born from his mind, the sun came into his existence from his eye, Indra and Agni came from his mouth, and from his breath was born the wind. From his navel issued the middle region, from his head unfurled the heaven, from his feet emerged the earth, and from the ear the 4 directions. So the worlds were organized. 7 were the enclosing sticks of sacrifice. Thrice 7 were made the fuel sticks, when the gods made ready for the sacrifice with the Cosmic Person as the oblation. With sacrifice, the gods worshipped the Cosmic Person, the intended sacrifice. These were the first established ordinances. These mighty powers attained the heaven where abide the ancient gods and the sadhyas. Well, as I told you, this is a verse I mean, it's extraordinary, great philosophy in that. But as I said, it may not fit into this context, so I will not take it up. But I wanted you to listen to the original mantra here of the Purusha Sukta. And while I am at it, I would like to just read out, not explain or go into details. But there is another sukta called the Nasadiya Sukta, which is again a hymn of creation. And this is done in a different way, but this is also extraordinarily interesting. So let's just read it out and see. It's very beautiful. It's more philosophic. The first one was more symbolic, whereas this you can see it has the Upanishadic tinge about it. This is the Nasadiya Sukta. I mean, some of you who have read Sri Aurobindo's poetry, especially if you remember the poem Who, you will see a lot of similarities between this and Who. Then was neither existent nor non-existent. The mid-world was not, nor the sky, nor what is beyond. What enveloped it? And where? In whose protection? What was the water? Unfathomable and deep. Remember, Sri Aurobindo has a similar line. Who was it? There are all those questions. What was his smile? What color did he have? Was it Krishna or Shiva? The similar, the sentences. And exactly there. What enveloped? And where? In whose protection? What was the water? Unfathomable and deep. Then was neither death nor deathlessness, nor any indication of day and night. The one breathed without breath by its self-law. Other than that was nothing else, nor aught beyond it. It is exactly the same phrase here. In the beginning was darkness hidden by darkness. We have this in Savitri too. In the beginning was darkness hidden by darkness, and all was an ocean of inconscience. When that lay concealed by endless fragmentation, the One came to be the power of His infinite austerity. In the beginning that moved as desire within, which was the first seed of mind, the seers, having meditated in their hearts, discovered the connection of the existent in the non-existent. A ray stretched out that cut the existent from the non-existent. What was there below? What was above? There were impregnators. There were mighty forces. There was self-law below and a will above. Who truly knows? Who here may declare it? Whence it is born? Whence indeed this creation? Even the gods were subsequent to the world's emergence. Then who knows from whence it arose? That out of which this creation has come into being, whether it upheld it or if it did not. He is the Lord of all this in the highest heaven, surely knows it, or perhaps He does not. The last line is a marvel. He who is the Lord of all this in the highest heaven surely knows it, or perhaps He does not. This is pure Indian philosophy at its best. This known and the unknown, but the way it is, I wish, I had known Sanskrit just to be able to understand this. Our Vladimir, if he was there, I would have requested him to read out the original, an extraordinary meaning. Well, if there is some occasion, we will study these two verses of creation. But only thing is, you should understand this concept of involution, evolution is there right in the beginning in the Vedas itself. Now, having said that, I'll go back to one sentence that I had read last time from this volume collected works of the Mother, number 5. And we had also discussed about it quite at length, because the Mother really speaks about the descent of the avatar, the need of the avatar. This is from page volume 5, 388 and 389. So just to recap, I'll read the couple of last sentences. In fact, if the divine consciousness and divine force could work directly from the place or state of their perfection, if they could work directly on matter and transform it, there would be no need to take a body like man's. It would have been enough to act from the world of truth with a perfect consciousness and upon consciousness. In fact, that acts perhaps, but so slowly that when there is this effort to make the world progress, make it go forward more rapidly, well, it is necessary to take on human nature. By taking the human body, one is obliged to take on human nature partially. Only, instead of losing one's consciousness and losing contact with the truth, one keeps this consciousness and this truth. And it is by joining the two that one can create exactly this kind of alchemy of transformation. But if one did not touch matter, one could do nothing for it. I read out till here, but there's one question after that which I'd like to read out today. Because as you remember, this question was in connection with Savitri. If you remember, the question was, Mother, suffering comes from ignorance and pain, but what is the nature of the suffering and pain the Divine Mother feels for her children, the Divine Mother in Savitri? So this entire answer was a response to that. So again, and with reference to Savitri, the question is, did Savitri foresee what she was going to do? Mother's answer, she said so. You have not read it? She had even been told that she would be alone. And she said, I am ready to be alone. You have not read it? It is in the canto they recited last year. There is a recitation in the ashram school from Savitri's Centenary, volume 29, page 503. Then the question is, did she, Savitri, know she would meet Mother of Sorrows, the Mother of Might, etc.? Well, I am not reading that. But while I was reading Savitri, I found a wonderful passage which really explains this question of where she says, Savitri had been told that she would be alone. And look at this passage from Savitri. A wonderful description of the same thing that Mother is telling. This is from volume 29, page 460. I mean, it's a remarkable passage explaining about this experience of Savitri being alone, and that she would have to deal with the transformation alone. And this also is a passage that was dictated the last by Sri Aurobindo. And it was a prophetic passage, because what it describes here, Mother experiences later in 1960, 61. So that's why I brought this passage for all of us to share. But remember also this question of alone, that she alone can do. So this is an answer from Narad to the queen. You know, the queen bemoans Savitri's choice. Then Narad says, Queen, strive no more to change the secret will. Time's accidents are steps in its vast scheme. Bring not thy brief and helpless human tears across the fathomless moments of a heart that knows its single will and God's as one. It can embrace its hostile destiny. It sits apart with grief and facing death, affronting adverse fate armed and alone. In this enormous world standing apart, in the mightiness of her silent spirit's will, in the passion of her soul of sacrifice, her lonely strength, facing the universe, affronting fate, asks not man's help, nor God's. Sometimes one life is charged with the earth's destiny. Sometimes one life is charged with earth's destiny. It cries not for succor from the time-bound powers. Alone, she is equal to her mighty task. Intervene not in a strife too great for thee, a struggle too deep for mortal thought to sound. Its question to this nature's rigid bounds, when the soul fronts nude of garbs the infinite. Its too vast theme of a lonely mortal will pacing the silence of eternity. I wish you had the book in front of you to see. Remarkably how Sri Aurobindo uses these words alone, apart, lonely, unaccompanied. Almost every other line has this word to emphasize that how the mother will, how Savitri and the mother. In fact, when I'm saying that, this is exactly the question that was asked here. Somebody says, Savitri represents the mother's consciousness, doesn't she? Mother says, yes. What does Satyavan represent? He is the avatar, isn't he? He is the incarnation of the Supreme. So that's why I'm referring to this experience, saying it's experience of Savitri or the mother is the same thing. So focus on this, how the mother alone can do this work. So as a star uncompanioned moves in heaven, unastonished by the immensities of space, traveling infinity by its own light, the great are strongest when they stand alone. A God-given might of being is their force, a ray from self's solitude of light, the guide. The soul that can live alone with itself meets God. Beautiful line. The soul that can live alone with itself meets God. Its lonely universe is their rendezvous. Now this is the passage that I'm going to read out, which was the last dictation. A day may come when she must stand unhelped on a dangerous brink of the world's doom and hers, carrying the world's future on her lonely breast, carrying the human hope in a heart-left soul to conquer or fail on a last desperate verge. Alone with death and close to extinction's edge, her single greatness in that last dire scene, she must cross alone a perilous bridge in time and reach an apex of world destiny where all is one or all is lost for man. In that tremendous silence, lone and lost, of a deciding hour in the world's fate, in her soul's climbing beyond mortal time, when she stands soul with death or soul with God, apart upon a silent, desperate brink, alone with herself and death and destiny, as on some verge between time and timelessness, when being must end or life rebuild its base. Alone she must conquer, or alone must fall. No human aid can reach her in that hour. No armored God stands shining at her side. Cry not to heaven, for she alone can save. For this the silent force came mission down. From spiritual angle, this is the experience of 1962, when a mother was on the brink of leaving her body. And from a poetic angle, it's surprising that a single word could be repeated so many times. We have encircled here, you see, almost 15-20 times the word alone, soul, unhelped, lonely. These are there. But obviously, that is the essence of this experience, that she alone can do the work. Just to finish that stanza, I'll continue reading from there. For this the silent force came mission down, in her the conscious will took human shape. She only can save herself and save the world. O Queen, stand back from that stupendous scene, come not between her and her hour of fate. Her hour must come, and none can intervene. Think not to turn her from her heaven-sent task. Strive not to save her from her own high will. Thou hast no place in that tremendous strife. Thy love and longing are not arbiters there. Leave the world's fate and her to God's sole guard. Even if He seems to leave her to her lone strength, even though all falters and falls and cease and end, and the heart fails and only are death and night, God-given her strength can battle against doom, even on a brink where death alone seems close, and no human strength can hinder or can help. Think not to intercede with the hidden will, intrude not twixt her spirit and its force, but leave her to her mighty self and fate. He spoke and ceased and left the earthly scene. Away from the strife and suffering on our globe, he turned towards his far-off blissful home. A brilliant arrow pointing straight to heaven, the luminous body of the eternal seer assailed the purpose glory of the noon and disappeared like a receding star, vanishing into the light of the unseen. But still a cry was heard in the infinite, and still to the listening soul on mortal earth, a high and far imperishable voice chanted the anthem of eternal love. Well, that I think I've taken you through these 7 paragraphs to the best of my knowledge and my research, trying to clarify all the philosophical concepts, whatever is within the ken of my understanding. So that brings us to the end of the first part of this chapter 6. From our next class, I'll be taking up the 4 aspects of the mother. So there we have not much of philosophy, because basically these are descriptions of the 4 aspects of the mother, and So these are, as we say in Sanskrit, Pashyanti Vak. They are not ridden with philosophy. There's hardly anything of the mind you will see here. It's pure vision. So in this pure vision and Pashyanti Vak of Sri Aurobindo describing the four aspects, whatever we have from Mother and Sri Aurobindo we will cover. But personally I think it would be only a kind of an invocation of these four aspects. And so we will go as much as we can, but it will be purely a reading from their vision. So that's what I really wanted to do, especially the first paragraphs. There's so much of philosophy and the life divine, but in the next few paragraphs, that is the pure invocation. And an invocation, I would say, I'm using the word invocation in a very specific sense, because remember when this was written, 1927-28 or 26-27. You see, these are not the deities that are there present in Indian culture. Indian culture has this name, Maheshwari, Saraswati, Lakshmi. But we are not to confuse the name that we have in Indian culture with these four aspects. What we have in our Indian tradition are the goddesses who belong to the overmental level. But these four aspects are not goddesses. These, as Sri Aurobindo calls them, aspects and powers of the divine Shakti. And as we have seen in one of the explanations, they are the powers and aspects of the divine on the supramental level. So the name similarity may be there because we in India, we have caught some inclination or some inkling of that supramental power. So we call them Maheshwari, Mahalakshmi and all that. But what Sri Aurobindo is describing is the description of the original Shaktis of the supramental level. So that's why, it's beyond any religious connotation or any religious description. And when he kind of describes this, invokes them, you see, I personally feel it was a manifestation itself. In those times it is as if, we in India have a tradition that when we invoke, especially we have in this, in Bengal's great Durga Puja, what is that invocation called in the beginning, first day? We have the Durga Puja invocation. Mahalaya. You see, during the Mahalaya, you see an extraordinary invocation of the divine Shakti, but this invocation is not just praying, it is asking her to descend and to manifest. So Mahalaya is a kind of a prayer and a process of the manifestation of the divine. So these four aspects here described are in that sense, when Sri Aurobindo was describing, giving them character, personality, description, color and shape and form, it is as if he was seeing them descending and coming down to the mother. It's not that the mother did not have, to manifest itself needs a kind of an invocation from the earth. The deities, these supramental deities respond to a prayer from earth. And Sri Aurobindo, representing this prayer from the earth, as if said, O Maishwari, O Ma Kali, O Ma Saraswati, O Ma Lakshmi, descend. If you remember, this is the principle of Savitri and Satyavan too. And this has been the principle of Mother and Sri Aurobindo too, that there is always an invocation, and in response to the invocation, the divine comes down. So there's got to be the call, the aspiration, the prayer, and the response and the grace. So this is the movement everywhere. In Savitri too, you remember the line where it says, O Savitri, descend upon this green earth. When Satyavan, of course, Savitri is sitting on a chariot, so it is only symbolic to say, but he says, descend, O Savitri, upon this green earth. So, as an invocation, in response to this call from the earth, represented by Satyavan, Satyavan represents the earth's soul. So when he is invoking Savitri to come down, then she comes down. And it's exactly the same thing that the mother also described vis-a-vis Sri Aurobindo, that when Sri Aurobindo calls her, invokes her, that she comes down. So these four descriptions are for me that kind of a description and invocation from the earth calling down the descent of the supramental Shaktis. There is nothing short of that. So it's after that perhaps, they became more alive, more powerful in his sadhana and her sadhana. So this is not a normal, a usual description as we know them to be. So we have to read them in that invocatory spirit. So it's almost a meditative thing where the mind cannot intervene. So I would also be careful not to really budge in with my mind, but only to read as much as they have described in there and read out what they have described. So this will be a different experience altogether. In the first part, I brought in a lot of philosophy because Sri Aurobindo brings in a lot of philosophical concepts. In part 2 or part B, whatever you want to call, it will be a different attitude. So we'll take it up from our next class. And I suppose now most of you can bring your books because we will be following the text, and I would like you to follow the books as much as possible. Well, we'll have our consultation now.